So first of all, it's my extreme pleasure to be joining this audience in this conference. And it's even more of a pleasure and a privilege to have an opportunity to talk to my friend, Joaquin Duato. Joaquin and I worked together on pharma. Actually, Joaquin led pharma during a very important period. And I've gotten to work very closely with him. And I hope through this interview, you'll learn more than just his title, which is obviously chairman and CEO of Johnson & Johnson, which is at the forefront of what's happening in our industry. And so I'll start by saying good morning and welcome, Joaquin.
Good morning, Ken, and a pleasure also to be with you. Thank you.
Sure. So you're in your second year as CEO of J&J, and you recently took on the role of chairman following a really terrific CEO, my good friend, Alex Gorski. And so throughout your career, you've done a lot of wonderful things. You've worked in a number of roles in geographies. And as I said, you've been very much at the forefront of our entire industry for many years now. So let's start a little bit with your career and your path to CEO. How did you get to where you are today? And what advice do you have for the audience, many of whom are at the early stages of their careers?
Thank you. And a great question. If you would have asked me 35 years ago when I started to work at Johnson & Johnson that I was going to become the CEO of this great company, I would not have believed you. That's my first observation. So I didn't start my career with the idea of becoming CEO. As a matter of fact, as an anecdote, when I finished graduate school here in the US, I interviewed for Johnson & Johnson, and I didn't make it into the second interview. So though, that tells you that interviewing is not a perfect art. For those of you in the audience, if you don't get hired after an interview, don't persist and be resilient. So during my career at Johnson & Johnson, I have done multiple roles as you described. Sometimes they were roles that I was not expecting, so they opened for me opportunities that I was not knowledgeable about. Like, for example, I work in our medical technology sector or in our consumer sector, so I was not expecting that to happen. And sometimes it was not even what I thought it was the best step for my career. So I work in multiple roles in multiple countries, and I believe that's part of the secret of my development, that I always have been open to new opportunities, and I always have said yes to those opportunities. So when I talk to people at Johnson & Johnson or people that are starting their career, I always tell them, be open for new opportunities. You don't know what you don't know. You may have a plan, but things are not gonna unfold like your plan, and be open for that and say yes. And I have a second observation here that I'm sure you share. In order to develop yourself, in order to have a fulfilling personal and professional career, it's very, very important the company that you join. That's a very, very important factor. Sometimes people that are starting careers are thinking about what job they are going to do. I think that is more important, what company do you join? I consider myself a product of Johnson & Johnson's development, and I can say without hesitation that I'm here where I am because of the opportunities that Johnson & Johnson provided me. So what company do you join? It's a key element in your future development and how happy you are with what you do. As you may have sensed by my accent, and the audience, sure they have already catch up to that, I was born in Spain, so I'm what in the US you would call a Hispanic. So for me, the value of diversity, it really came to head when I came to the US, right? When I came to live to the US 21 years ago. Before that, I had worked in Spain, I had worked in Italy, I have had European roles, and pretty much I was always among people that were similar to me. Sure, everybody has stereotypes and biases, that's no question about it. But I didn't realize the importance of diversity until I came to the US 20 years ago, and I saw how diverse this country is. And, I got myself a little glimpse of what diversity and inclusion means by virtue of this accent that I have. And, for the English audience, for the English-speaking audience, for the US-based audience, you know that if you have a Hispanic accent in the US, you are subject to certain stereotypes. Also for the Indian audience, if you have an Indian audience in the US, you are subject to certain stereotypes. So, me, myself, when I came here, not when I was in the company, but when I was having my normal life outside of the walls of the company, I was feeling some of these stereotypes and biases that I never felt in my life. So I got a dose of that, a glimpse of what it means to be different and what it means to have biases. And, that was a big life lesson for me, Ken. And it taught me something important, which is empathy. So I think I became better by understanding the power of diversity and by becoming largely a much more empathetic person than I was before I came to Europe. So it was an important life lesson for me. And since that, I always have considered diversity, equity, and inclusion as a core component of how I lead. And now as a CEO of Johnson & Johnson, as a core component of our culture and the reasons people like to work for a company like us. I believe that this is central to what we do. As many in the audience know, we have at Johnson & Johnson a set of values and principles that we call our credo. Our credo was written in 1943, so exactly now 80 years ago. And when you read it today, you may think it's a normal value statement, but think about how pioneer this was 80 years ago. Putting the patients and consumers first, then employees, then communities, and if you do a good job, then you're gonna have a fair return for the shareholders. That is the purpose of the corporation today, but that was written 80 years ago, and it's an integral part of what it means to work at Johnson & Johnson and what makes this company special. So for me today, when we're talking about our employees, which is a key driver of success of a multi-generational company like Johnson & Johnson, one of the key elements why employees like to work for Johnson & Johnson, one of the key elements that we have to attract people into Johnson & Johnson is precisely diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I consider that a core component of who we are at Johnson & Johnson. I want to make sure that we have the appropriate representation, and we can discuss about that later. I want to make sure that we have appropriate efforts on health equity. And finally, I want to make sure that we create an inclusive environment where our employees feel good and can feel themselves when they work at Johnson & Johnson. So that's part of who we are, and it's very important for me to maintain that as a core component of what it means to work at Johnson & Johnson. Certainly, I think that you have to measure the progress in those areas, and we have specific measurements in diversity. We have a goal of having 50% female representation in management and above, and we are very close to that already. We have 49% of female representation in management and above. Some regions like EMEA and Latin America are ahead of that. And in our executive committee at Johnson & Johnson, we have 50% representations of females. So we are doing well on that compartment. When I look at the US specifically, we have a goal of having 35% ethnic diversity in all our management ranks, and we're doing really well into that goal. And finally, when it comes to Black and African Americans, we also have a specific goal to increase the absolute numbers of Black and African Americans in management by 50%. We put that goal in 2021 to accomplish in 2025, and we are already almost there in 2023. So we have done a lot of progress, and that requires focus, attention, goals, and we have a policy of ensuring that every manager in the company that has responsibility over people does have diversity and inclusion goals in their goals and objectives for the year, because you achieve what you measure. So we are very, very focused on doing that, which is an important thing for a healthcare company. As you know, I believe healthcare companies are mission-driven companies. I mean, our ethos is to try to address the toughest challenges that society has in form of diseases. So we have dedicated efforts in health equity. In the US, we have a program that we call Our Race to Health Equity, that we have pledged $100 million to foster healthcare professionals in underserved communities. and it has created a lot of participation, good partnerships, and globally we have a bigger effort which we are pledging $250 million to support frontline healthcare workers in low resource settings. So we put our money where our mouth is, and we try to work towards driving health equity through those efforts in the US and outside of the US. And for the audience, if you go to the Johnson & Johnson website, we have a report that we call Health for Humanity, where we give you a very detailed account every year of the efforts that we are doing in order to foster health equity. And it connects with some of the questions that I heard before about, are the capital markets open or not? I'm gonna comment on that later. So about a year and a half ago, we decided to move on and create two new companies. One company which is going to be a global consumer health champion. The name of this new company is going to be Kenvue, and another company which is going to retain the name of Johnson & Johnson, which is going to be focused in the most challenging diseases around medical technology and pharmaceuticals. So we are now right in the middle of that, and right in the separation of our consumer health company called Kenvue. Why do I believe this is the right move to evolve Johnson & Johnson into the future? And keep in mind that our aspiration in Johnson & Johnson, my goal as CEO, is to be able to create multi-generational success. So we have a history of 137 years. So I'm thinking about what is our mission, not only for the next couple of years, but for decades in the future. So I think that a sign of evolution is to be able to create two different companies. One is going to be focused on the consumer, the other one is going to be focused on the patient. And I believe that by having these focused organizations, we are going to be able to better serve our constituencies. It's very difficult for a company today, Ken, to be able to compete in beauty with L'Oreal, and at the same time to be able to compete in robotic assisted surgery with Intuitive, or in pharmaceuticals with Merck. It's very different skill sets that you need. So I think that by being more focused, more specialized, more targeted, we're going to be able to serve our constituents, patients and consumers better. So we are in the middle of the Kenvue separation. Last week we started the roadshow, which is a preliminary step moving into the initial public offering. We expect to launch the initial public offering very, very soon. And there's a lot of interest for Kenvue, and I guess it's a good sign of how the markets are recovering from an IPO perspective. So I think it's also a test for the market how well our IPO does. This is a great company, Kenvue. It has sales of $15 billion globally. It's in every country of the world, and the brands are iconic. I'm sure all of you know Johnson & Johnson for those brands and have used those brands. Baby shampoo, Band-Aids, Tylenol. So really, it's going to be a tremendous company, and I'm convinced that it's going to be also fantastic for the remaining Johnson & Johnson, being the only company focused in medtech and pharmaceuticals. And I do see, and we can comment that later, intersection between medtech and pharmaceuticals. It's the same diseases, the same hospitals, the same payers, and the future will bring interventions for diseases that will combine, as it happens today, in cancer or in cardiovascular surgery and pharmaceuticals. So I see a great combination of skills, having this ability to have capabilities both in biopharmaceuticals and in the area of medical technology. So I am an optimistic person, and I think that people like to work with optimistic individuals. I believe that, you have to be realistic and grounded, but optimistic individuals, transmit energy and, create a pool which is positive for an organization. So that's why I want to inspire people by telling them that I am convinced that we are going to be able to advance more in this decade that we have done in the past century when it comes to addressing some of the most difficult challenges in healthcare, like cancer, for example, or neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer. So I am convinced that this is going to be the case. Why is that? I think there's there's a unique combination in history now, which is the convergence of our better understanding of human biology. So what is the origin of diseases, with the convergence of technology and our ability to process and interpret large sets of data that we didn't have before. I mean, there's not how technology is transforming the way we behave as society, is changing the way we shop, is changing the way we consume information, is changing the way we run our companies, and it's also changing the way we are discovering medicines, frankly. Today, every company is using technologies in order to be able to screen different molecules, in order to be able to understand better the relation between structure and function, in order to use those learnings to better design molecules. So I'm convinced that this is going to be a force in bringing new therapies to life. And as a matter of fact, you are seeing that today. I mean, we have an emergence of new treatment modalities that we were not speaking 10 years ago. Today we're talking about cell therapy. How do we use our own immune system cells to combat diseases like cancer? We're talking about gene therapy, how we insert and replace defective genes to cure diseases like blindness. Or we are talking about RNA therapeutics, how we use our own cells to manufacture different proteins that are going to be addressing different diseases. So the emergence of these new treatment modalities and the combination that technology is bringing in, fueling and accelerating that change, is going to bring cures to diseases that are really complex, that we have been chasing for decades. One example, in my view, and I bring an example from our company, is cancer. For example, now we have a therapy, a cell therapy for cancer in multiple myeloma that it's just been approved in the US, and it has 90+% response rates in patients with multiple myeloma that had already undergone 4 to 5 lines of therapy. I mean, are we going to be able to cure multiple myeloma or other cancers? Maybe not curing, but maybe very likely being able to convert them in chronic diseases. And this is not my opinion. I was talking to one of our lead investigators in the last American Society of Hematology Congress, and she was telling me, Joaquin, I never used in the past the word cure when it came to cancer, because I've seen many patients not having that. But today, with the combination of sequencing of new therapies, I actually speak to my patients of the possibility of a cure. So I think that is super exciting, and that's why I think that you're going to see that in many different areas. Today there was news about one of our fellow biopharmaceutical companies showing results on how they were slowing cognitive deterioration in Alzheimer's. So with the advances we're doing in early diagnosis, we may be